Cool.
Is everyone's audio working? Yes, okay, cool. Hello and welcome to Shotcast. That was 5 people.
I'm Galina Jarrett, a longtime bestie of all these people and musical collaborator, and have been in London for the last 4 years, on and off with big kind of trips, COVID-y trips, back and forth. So still very much collaborator, just slightly across the ocean.
I'm Nicola, cellist and sometimes composer/arranger for Shot Ensemble and or the Nightlight Collective, depending on the mood. Based in Joburg at this point, but obviously I was in Cape Town when we were doing these things. I wasn't just the ghost of cellist past.
My name is Cara Stacey, and I'm the late addition to the party, although now that was many years ago. So, pianist and musical bow player, whatever was needed.
I'm Sarah, and I'm the viola player, and I suppose that's all you really need to know.
I'm Matthijs van Dijk, I'm composer, what a vine, stick dragger. And so who was the Shot Ensemble, and why do I feel that we need to do a thesis on it? And basically we are a new music collective, and we would play our own stuff. We did a lot of collaboration with quite a few other musical artists and visual artists and dance collectives during a time I think there wasn't really much happening. I know that's maybe a controversial thing to say, but I know there was sort of like the age-old issue of lack of venues and lack of gigs. It's not that we were the only group, not by a long shot, which is why I'm also writing this thesis. I think we managed to collaborate with at least one member of the various groups that were happening around that time, if not the entire group in some cases. I guess the important question, how did Shot start? Why did it exist?
I think it was just wanting to do something and wanting to play your music. This conversation of, well, if you can't find, instead of sitting around waiting for people to approach you to play stuff, just use the people that are around you anyway. So we went to a 40th birthday party. I remember still thinking, oh, this is, these are mature people, they're 40. And we're there now. We were just talking to them about doing a gig in their bookshop, in Audrey's bookshop.
Yeah, Cork Bay Books.
And so then it was, well, let's just make this happen with whoever's around and people that we like and our friends. Are you talking about how we all met each other? Because that's your story.
We studied together. Some of us were in the National Youth Orchestra together 1,000 years ago. And, the classical music world is small. So here we all are.
At the beginning time of that was, we could mention Barrington Studios as our, speaking of our financially bad decisions, well, we call it our huge little, to quote Arrested Development, our huge little mistake. But like, it was the worst decision that we ever made, exactly. Where we, a bunch of us, 5 of us, with Bokani Dayan and Sakile Monisha and Cara, Nicola, myself, we all decided to spend all our money that we didn't really have from our jobs to rent a huge house in Observatory. And this was not a soundproofed house. This was just your regular kind of Victorian drafty paper thin walled house in Observatory. And we turned it into a kind of functional studio / hostel for whoever ended up sleeping there by the end of that era. We put on concerts there. And it was also just part of that spirit of like, just rent a place with money you don't have, put on shows, try and weirdly make money about it by charging 10 rand per glass of wine and see what happens. So, yeah.
But I think, what Sarah was saying, the idea of like, that you needed to create your own kind of opportunities. I know from my side, I think this came half from sort of my experiences at UCT and half from sort of just like the environment that I grew up in and everything like that, that part of me kind of felt that one had failed, for want of a better word, as a composer if you were playing your own music, which is a strange way of thinking about it if you kind of look at like every musical artist, I guess, or well-known artist or whatever, they write their own stuff, they play their own stuff. But I think there was, at least in my mind at any rate, sort of a hurdle to cross about like, well, no, classical musician, you have orchestras and other groups play your stuff, so I don't want to do it. And I do know that at the time, Sarah very much sort of pushed me to do it because you guys had done a show together at one point.
Well, that's how we met, was that Flower of Shembe,
Yeah, we were playing a lot of Neo Muyanga's music at that time. That was the genesis story, I guess. That was with Flower of Shembe, the first production we did. Actually, the first one was Memory of How It Feels. Memory of How It Feels was a beautiful theatre piece that Neo did, and with a small ensemble and a cast of about 4 actors and dancers, and it was just incredibly intimate, unusual, wildly creative piece. And I think for all of us were quite taken aback by the style and the approach that Neo had towards relationships with performers, towards a much more relaxed kind of rehearsal style, a lot more conversation, a lot more kind of conceptual involvement, a lot more agency, I think, for performers. And it was very different from the kind of stiff Western classical world that we might have. So it felt like a very refreshing experience, I think, for all of us. And I think definitely for my part, and I'm sure the others could say the same, is that it was quite empowering to be part of that, because it gave you the sense of, oh, wow, well, if this is possible, it kind of emboldens me to think that I could also have a group of friends, have this really congenial environment, this very creative feeling, and put on my own things. And I think Neo's very good at getting people to have that confidence in themselves, because he was a kind of slightly generation above us at that time. So that was definitely a formative time for me.
At the same time, also, there was a very weird and wonderful concert series happening that Gerard was running. I cannot remember the name. We're going to have to edit this out. City Soirees, a series of house concerts that were also just really kind of outside mainstream anythings. So I think creatively Neo's work was extraordinary, but still happening, at the Baxter Theatre in kind of more formal spaces. That was on the kind of one end of the spectrum. And then at the same time, Gerard was organizing these completely weird and wonderful gigs, which some of us have played in very beautiful, like intimate spaces in people's lounges. And that was also something completely fresh in terms of venues. It was just a totally different way of thinking about the scene, like physically as, where are concerts allowed to happen, as it were.
The whole idea of performance space, I think, was a very big one for us. And I mean, the first gig, we did the thing at Cork Bay Books. And I mean, that was really kind of an excuse to do my 7-string quartet. The short version of that piece, the story, is basically had a really great lesson with Missy Matsoli about sort of embracing the slightly more rock and roll side of things, as opposed to doing like straight classical, for want of a better word, or straight art music. And then subsequently had a really crap lesson a few months later with a composer in Germany that kind of led me to that point of just like having enough of the classical music scene altogether. So I think when Sarah at the time said to me, like, well, having just done City Soiree with Guz and with Nicola, it's just like, come on, you know them from college, you have these friends, like, let's go and do that. Which I suppose leads us to the first, I don't want to hog the conversation, but the first important question, which is arose by any other name. Why the Shot Ensemble? And I did promise everyone here that I would tell the story just to make it worth everyone's while. And I'll tell this.
And we just preface it with like a lot of our rehearsals involved a lot of wine and a lot of silliness. It's not like we were sober drinking coffee at 9 on a Monday morning and this conversation happened. But let's just set the scene here.
Maximum levels of silliness were.
Yes.
Always.
I told everyone in the rehearsal about the absolute worst rehearsal that I ever had, which involved a rehearsal in a garage in Valkenburg, of all places. And I politely, quietly farted to myself, and a lot more substance than was expected, which I think is the Shard motto. I said, and I sharted myself, and the three of the other members of the group had apparently never heard that word before. And it sparked everyone's imagination to such a degree that when we decided, well, we need a name, it was just like, well, let's call us Arts, and it sort of became a whole thing. And I think after a couple of gigs, we just gave up. And I think even between ourselves, we never quite agreed on the spelling of it until very late into the game. I think by that point, we started calling ourselves the Nightlight Collective. Obsessed with what I'd seen in New York of the whole kind of performance thing of having classical music in bars. The idea that, you can have a drink, if you don't like the piece, you can go outside, have a smoke, come back.
When I met you, which would have been 2011 or 12, you were talking about how you'd been running around Cape Town, I'm sure it was with Cara, to bars and things because you really wanted to make this thing happen and you had a whole, you and Cara and somebody else were going around to bars to kind of sell this idea of playing in the bars. That was 2011 or 12, and Shart only happened in 2014. So it's already the ideas were obviously kind of distilling for quite a while.
So when Cara and I were running through Long Street, asking various venues, going this is what we want to do, the reaction we would generally get would be something along the lines of, yes, but it's not jazz or rock and roll. And sort of having to go yes, but that's the point. It's not jazz or it's not rock. It's trying to do something different. But I know also later on, so Cara and Nicola, the two of you had a concert series, which I think was also, while not officially a Shard thing, it definitely sort of an offshoot of it. So I don't know.
That's present tense, have to you, sir.
Have, well...
COVID put a little bit of a damper on intimate house concerts in our lounges, needless to say.
Slightly dormant for now, yeah. Nicola and myself, I can say we've been quite entrepreneurial throughout our whole friendship. Various ventures and plans, and I think at some point we were trying to advertise we do laundry for musicians and help build their websites and stuff.
You buy pencils for musicians.
Anything to earn a rent.
But I went and studied in the UK, and then while I was in the UK I played a really inspiring concert series called Club Integral, and I really loved the format of that, which was lots of different kinds of venues, mostly pubs or, not necessarily in people's lounges or whatever, but smallish kind of venues. But the idea was that there would be 4 sets, short sets of music, and there'd be completely, contrasting styles, totally different things. One event I went to, it was music. There was some crowd rock, and then there was a local politician talking about labor issues in the borough. It was really sweet, and that lasted 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then we went on to some folk duo, and then there was a string quartet after that. So I really loved that idea of musical tapas. If you didn't like something, you could just go and have a cigarette outside and then come back when it was done. So Nicola and I had spoken about this, and then we started our version of that called Betwixt. And we did quite a few concerts in Cape Town, different spaces, but then also we've done some stuff in Joburg as well. We kind of moved around and I think we learned a lot from doing it. I think it was really nice. I enjoyed it, even though sometimes quite stressful to run a concert series. But it was playing on a lot of that similar stuff that we've all spoken about, that Matthijs, you and I have spoken about since like 2008 or something. The thing that was so special for me about the Shout Ensemble as well is not only that thing of getting your works played, writing stuff and hearing it, but also other people coming to hear it. and just kind of breaking down all those conventional boundaries that we had been programmed with, or at least I had been, coming through kind of conventional classical musical education. All of that stuff that held me back and made me really anxious, but just doing the opposite of that.
It's that thing of that, you are trained to a certain extent to think that like certain venues are more important than others, as opposed to just actually like just do the show. I mean, I think the whole group had an interesting trajectory. I think just sort of thinking of like the last show that we did together officially would have been the Spear Festival. I can't well, if one excludes Aram, which sort of by, the four of us were part of that. But that was sort of an online thing, but like the last time that we actually sort of performed to people. But starting off from sort of like your bookshops, the motorcycle concert that we did in the Vintage Car Garage, Detroit Vintage Car Garage, like even down to the residency, which I think that really helped. Well, I know, I can say it helped me from a compositional point of view, because if you ever want to get fit as a composer, have like a monthly residency where you have to put together a new program once a month. I think around that time, guys, you started kind of not playing less and less. There were still quite a few gigs, but I think you had Madness at that point. And I'm talking about a show, not in general. I mean, Sarah and myself played. Nicola, you didn't do any of the shows. Even there, I would argue, and I will in my thesis coming soon. But the fact that sort of there's stuff that what we did within sort of that bar environment and stuff, we managed to then bring that kind of sound world into slightly more, official spaces, for want of a better word. I think of Madness. I think of the collaboration that we did with Lungiswell. Even I would go as far as saying the Dennis Goldberg piece that I did, The Moments in the Life, where I know definitely while I was writing it, not only were there sketches that we had performed at the Blah Blah Bar, which made its way into the Goldberg piece, there definitely also stylistic things of the slightly more kind of rock and roll stuff, or all the prison scenes in that piece. I drew quite heavily from like the free improv gigs that we were attending at the time, and sort of that kind of sound world.
The state's case against us was very strong. They had an advantage because alone in all our laws, if a case could be made, you had to prove your innocence. The idea of innocent until proven guilty was thrown out the window to make it easy for the prosecution.
It just started as this itch to do something different and fun. And I think we were all just feeling a bit defeated and frustrated, with the music scene in Cape Town at the time. And then it expanded to be, like betwixt hosted gigs in Joburg, and then, productions like at the Baxter, at Stellenbosch, for the Dennis Goldberg piece, and kind of beyond, and the National Arts Festival as well.
How did the Blah Blah Bar residency happen?
I remember going to watch a gig with Conrad, who's friend from Wellington owned that place. I think we went and we saw a rock band and then got talking to the owners or something. And because Conrad knew the owner, then there was this sort of, and they had been putting out feelers looking for people to come and play.
Through that, we started doing more and more collaborations with other artists because we suddenly had to fill, I think we did 7 if I'm not mistaken. And at this point, Cara, we had already performed with you for Boomer, the motorcycle orchestra thing. Because I think Boomer was with Lungiswa. I know while officially it wasn't sort of like we are now all a group together, for me that is still kind of like the prototype shot gig, I think.
I can't remember now if we did the things that grow blah 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 gig first or that. I don't really remember, but it was around the same time. I think I just come back from the UK at some point. I kept going there and coming back. You guys had already done quite a lot of work together, which looked very exciting from afar. And I just released an album, and I think you, Matthijs, you asked me if we could collaborate and kind of reimagine it for the ensemble, which was very amazing for me because I also, because of the way that album was made, it was kind of like the second or third time I'd ever played that stuff live outside of studio. So it was really cool. But yeah, and then obviously through Galina, a long time ago, we had met Juliana Fenta, singer and actress. And we had this mad collaboration where she wanted to bring in all these motorbike bikers, whatever, guys making a lot of noise. And we played with Clement Benny and
I think that was it.
Can't remember who else.
No, I think
that was it, right?
Yeah.
And the motorbike guys.
And the motorbike
guys.
Yeah, Gary, Steve, Brian.
That pushed like some serious boundaries for me. I think that was it was completely nuts and quite taxing in lots of ways, but also just if I think back to the sound of it and the whole experience, it was like, it felt like the most extreme experiment of all of them because it was in quite an uncomfortable, strange space. It was bloody loud by the end because the motorbike guys were like, Rah! We were also playing, like, if you thought about the mix of different sounds and things that we played, it was like kind of, it was really fascinating and beautiful in the end.
definitely gave me a completely different perspective on music. So if you had kind of conservative classical musicians here, and then you had really warm, people-loving, community-spirited musicians like Neo on here, you just had, the perfect triangle of just absolute sound anarchy, wildness, like, proverbial take off all your clothes and just let it all the anger rage, and that was a different influence. And I think every time I wanted to make things a bit safe and nice, she would always kind of whip me in a different direction, and that was definitely another influence of the time. Oh, another thing about that gig was that she insisted we went on breakfast TV to promote it on, like, what's one of those morning shows with the like really naff presenters, and they're like, hey guys, now we're going to talk about some noise music. Ever heard of that? Crazy. I got Juliana to my left. And then we did this very kind of completely out of place motorcycle demonstration with this kind of heavily powdered presenter kind of looking at us, and it was just that she was like, why can't you just try and advertise this to all of South Africa, like fishing for a lobster in the Nile River or something, to see if someone will come. Like, why not just go big or go home and treat it like people will come and just splash it out there. So I think everything about the ballsiness of the whole experience was, that was, for me, that was special.
Another huge influence, I think, is Edge of Wrong. I don't know, some of us might have performed in some of those shows, but to be able to sit at Straight No Chaser and just watch these wonderfully mad, incredibly talented musicians produce the most like unreal out there sound effects and soundscapes and music. Those are still, I think, some of the best gigs I've ever attended in my life. And that was also kind of influencing, it was all part of the stretching our ears, I think, and stretching the boundaries. And I think Juliana also was operating at the time from that kind of space where it was like, just embrace the chaos, and just like run full tilt towards the anarchy and see what happens. And usually it's completely magical.
'09, I think, was quite special for me. Just because it was absolutely bonkers, the idea of squeezing 9 of us on that tiny little stage. The Alternative Festival was also absolutely bonkers, playing in the freezing cold, doing like a free improv thing sandwiched between like goth folk music and I can't remember the band now, but
in a quarry.
In a quarry, and it's that thing of like, sure, like, I'm sure your rock and roll is very ballsy, but have you ever done like a free improv in the middle of like, goths and the whole lot of going like, what's going on here?
This sadly was without Galina, but the gigs with Lungis were at especially the Mozart Festival gigs in Joburg, because I just remember so many people afterwards saying, I mean, I've been living in Joburg for a while now, and even now I can't say I have a good sense of the classical scene here, but I think I really strongly had a feeling after that gig that even just that, which by our standards was that wasn't the wildest thing we'd ever done. It was quite considered. It was, it It was very beautiful sounding. There wasn't too much stretching of ears. It was just like a fairly lateral collaboration. It seemed pretty good, you know, and fun to put together. But hearing how radical even that seemed to classical audiences in Joburg, or kind of mainstream audiences, it felt really special as well. And then obviously we did a national arts festival, but I think the Joburg gigs felt very special.
I was also thinking that the Joburg International Mozart Festival was one of the most special. For me, because I know the Linda Auditorium really well. When I started playing cello as a kid, that was like, I think where my first little baby recital happened on that stage. And it was like a radical act of kind of personal musical transformation and like reclaiming a space to come back to that stage with fairy lights and, Waldo Alexander's mum's carpet and uplighters and like a whole set basically that we had to move from one venue, to the main stage. And as you say, like the feedback we had after that was just kind of astonishing.
From myself, I can say that I know it is reactionary to what was coming before and what had been going on around at the time. I know that stylistically, I was probably looking way more towards American music than European. I know that that's sort of part of why the Seven Quartet is how it is.
It's an interesting one though, because our sound is like a curation of all of our different compositional and arrangement tastes and styles, I think. We are definitely not a classical music ensemble, just to make that abundantly clear. There's no way. I think we happen to be classically trained, but that's like a coincidence. But I think, if I think back on our gigs, and the way we would program things together and kind of balance stuff out and think quite carefully about the experience of listening to and, attending one of our concerts. There was definitely a particular kind of shape to the energy of a gig. And we made very specific kind of curational choices about what to combine with what. I do think we had a sound, even when we were collaborating with, brass players and bassists and drummers and who knows whatever else. And I think a lot of that also boils down to when you're in a position as a composer or an arranger to be writing for the same group of people at the core, and you're not really writing for instruments anymore. You're writing for humans, for players that and you can actually start arranging stuff for their strengths and for the ensemble's strengths and musical interests. And I think we got really good at doing that.
I just always think of the word warm in terms of warmth of sound, and also just obviously because we're like buddies, but and the wine, obviously, maybe that's part of it. But Galina's violin sound specifically to me has always got a very warm, she has this very individual, warm, sweet sound. That influenced how I sort of tried to learn to experiment with my sound as well. Definitely I think Gaz was one of the first people who sort of spoke to me about your personality coming through your sound, really, like very directly, And I remember being aware of that when she mentioned that, and then that sort of started bringing it out more and more. Because as a classical musician and as someone who's been through university, you get so traumatized by being hung up on technical aspects and being able to play in tune and in time and sit properly and all that kind of thing. This is a cliche and we always go on and on about it, but it really is. And I think future generations are struggling with the same thing. And we need to keep the conversation going, because I think people struggle over and over again without necessarily knowing that you can hack through that, and that finding your individuality through your sound is really a thing. And I think combined forces, all our string sounds and chorus, piano, improv, especially, like just the sort of heart behind these things, even down to things like fairy lights and having decorative throws over our chairs.
We definitely have an aesthetic. Yeah,
it's an aesthetic. It's an oral and visual aesthetic, I think.
Yeah,
I think our need to try and push and take chances and do different things each time and have interesting concepts probably trumped our need for things to come out perfectly, because they definitely didn't every time. We have lots of experiments and some recipes are more delicious than others. It was always just about trying things. And just what you were saying before about the sound that we have, the way I think about it is that collectively, within all of it, within a contemporary musical world, if you're going to try and judge it, I feel like we were more tuneful within that. Like we had more of a narrative or a personality, or in a way that you would have bands that actually play songs where there are melodies and sentences are said. I think musical sentences are said. I think maybe we were kind of hanging on that side of a contemporary music sound, which can take itself extremely very seriously. And the other thing is just the influence of free improvisation. So I think tunes, musical sentences, expressions, melody, and veering into this quite improvisational, textural quality, I'd say that is our sound. When I would compare it to kind of contemporary classical music, which can perhaps become a bit more technical or dense or less, or more afraid of tunes perhaps, because they think if you're doing tunes, you're doing pop music or something.
But I think, like, especially when we started, and I know for like the first couple, we did all those rock tune arrangements, and I don't think that was ever sort of like the intention to kind of like, this is what we're going to do, we're just going to play Radiohead and we're just going to do that. I think we used that kind of as like a foot in the door at the beginning, and now it's kind of like, okay. I mean, even the very first concert that we did was the Seventh Quartet, but plus like Billie Jean, Paranoid Android, BYOB, and all that. So it's kind of like, right, we have your attention now, and we're going. Now we're actually going to play our music.
I listened to Nude, the Radiohead from the Radiohead show we did, Galina's arrangement. And I also just remembered that both of you, your string arrangements, the sort of very close harmonies and very sort of warm, fuzzy sound. I think that is like, it's very much specific. I don't know why both of you arranged like that, but or if that's what normal arrangement is, and I don't know. But it's very beautiful, like the very like.
What I can say, and I indirectly said this as a talk I did a couple of days ago for Pretoria University, name drop. I said to the kids that, if you want to get good fast, is you need to play with your friends, or you need to play your own arrangements like in an orchestra, because you're kind of forced to, you'll hear the instant feedback, whether you want it or not. But what I can also say, like from myself, to what you were saying about like sounding like Galina, I think it was when we were doing 09, sort of around the time, sort of hearing stuff that Galina was doing, and me going like, ooh, I now need to sort of like come out of my classical shell like a little bit more. But like that, I 1,000% was stealing from Guz at that point, of just kind of like, well, if you think that's
and
cool,
I you.
Well. The lawsuit is still pending, but the point is that I always think of like the Lennon-McCartney kind of friendly rivalry, as it were, of like, oh, you wrote that song, I like that, I'm going to try and do it better, or whatever, even if it's subconsciously or whatever. I know that's my competitive nature, to try and like not one up, but just to sort of like to keep up, I think is probably the more polite way of saying it. You know what I mean?
For me, the idea of Shot was to take ourselves as unseriously as possible, To me, that was the joy of it, was not thinking we were really doing anything.
I've always said, that it's like playing with you guys on stage. To me, it's like, it's so comfortable that I feel like I'm playing in my pajamas. And yeah, I think that's probably the best way to sum it up. It's like, you just know. And it helps, also because we're friends. No, that's true. I mean, like sometimes your pajamas get really uncomfortable.
How old the pajamas
you might get a little sweaty and flush
as
out
long
the
as
collar.
as long as it's not like playing in Crocs or something like that, then I'll take it.
As a hectically anxious person, I can say that the whole experience has been really good for me. And I remember thinking, like, even planning National Arts Festival gigs now for the Standard Bank Award, just knowing that I could look under the lid and see Nicola, look Nicola in the face, because that was generally my view, from the Shot days. I think especially when every concert, most of the concerts we're doing the program once, very rarely doing it more than once. So it's kind of fresh. And then we're also taking a bunch of different risks often. So it was sweaty pajamas. It wasn't like completely, relaxed and this is totally fine. It was kind of like we're taking artistic chances a lot of the time. So it was just so important to have friends on stage who were in it together, and it mattered to all of us. I think we can say that. I don't know if we nailed absolutely everything, but I think it mattered to all of us, everything we did.
Matthijs, hi. Thank you so much for this wonderful retrospective look into your work, into the ensemble's work. Am I correct when I say that you've disbanded and you're not playing together?
It's complicated. It's not that we've disbanded. It's unfortunately we are spread out all over the globe at the moment. With 2 of the members in Cape Town, 2 of the members in Joburg, and Galena in the UK. There have been a couple of things that we've done, especially during lockdown and a little bit before that, via email, as it were. But I mean, we still very regularly chat in the WhatsApp group about, we should be doing this or we should do something. So it's not that we've disbanded, but it's
right.
just been a while since we've done anything. Yeah.
It's very good news, because this is a really unique constellation of personalities having done wonderful work, and I'd like to congratulate you and encourage you to continue. I know your work quite well, and I've always had the sense, distinct sense, that there's a little bit of a tension between what an education system, a composition education setup, shall we call that, can offer young composers, and what you have experienced and your own point of view. Now, I think this is beautiful because, in my opinion, composers who are bolshy and who just stand up to the system are the composers who stand out. So I love this backbone. But could we interrogate that a little bit, please?
Sure. I mean, I think it's like you're trying to get me into trouble. No, the thing is, like, there are, like, there's a lot of positive and there's a lot of good stuff that I think that can obviously come out of a university system. So actually, I can semi-quote something that I wrote a couple of days ago. So I'm part of why I did this whole talk, because I'm busy doing a master's through Stellenbosch University, and I'm writing about, my thesis is on the group. And we had to do a scripted response on decolonization, as an example. And the part of what I wrote in the scripted response was that what I found, as soon as I was outside of the university system and everything that I've subsequently done in my career, a lot of it has been based on things that one never really learned, or we didn't learn about when we were students. I mean, if you look at the group, the majority, it's women composers. The people we collaborated with are women composers. I know that I think I obviously haven't been part of the system in a while, so I don't know how things are at the moment. I assume things have improved. But it's composers of color. It's the slightly more kind of like rock sound of things, popular music kind of aspects that work its way into it, which is all stuff that you don't really learn at a university, or I didn't, and I think everyone in the group can agree on that, like when we were there. So I think that there is obviously a very big importance about the stuff that you can learn at a university when you learn the basics, sort of how to analyze a chorale and all that. But there is so much of kind of like the stuff that unfortunately, be it for time reasons or whatever, kind of falls through the cracks, which I think is very important. And I can say from personal experience, I would not have a career if I didn't focus on those aspects of music. If that answers that.
Am I correct when I say that you've got this very like an artistic freedom that you adhere to draw from different musical styles, from different performance modes, and just use that in your work.
100%. I think, and this is also the piece of mine that is being performed this evening. It comes across, I think, in that, and also I think in the Goldberg piece, and I think basically everything that I've written from like 2010 onwards. I very much believe that, you know, there are always these debates about like tonality, atonality, modernism, all that. And I find that, especially in an era where one has something like Spotify, where it's just like you can listen to absolutely any type of music that you want at any time of day, those kind of conversations get a little bit blurrier. It gets a little bit trickier to kind of go like, well, this is the sound of the era, or things like that. So I tend to view stylistic choices as, you know, the same way if one had like a palette and when we're an artist and you go like, I feel like blue, and blue just happens to be metal or, you know, rock or whatever. I mean, so the work this evening, that came very much from a point of, and a little bit to what you were saying earlier, the thing of like, when I started studying composition, I've always loved rock music. It was always a very important part of my musical growth. But I kind of felt a little bit embarrassed about it when I started, you know, getting into the realm of like serious classical music, and that sort of thing of almost not forced, but maybe a little bit forced to kind of like push it aside. It's like, no, this is the art. This is the more important art. And it took Missy Matsoli to sort of like encourage me to go like, well, who cares what other people think? Just write how you want to write. Like, find your voice and do that. And it was ultimately there. I mentioned briefly that there was this horrible lesson that I had in when I was in Germany, where the guy basically kicked me around for 2 hours verbally and couldn't offer any constructive criticism by the end of it. I walked away from it kind of going like, I'm so tired of like the classical music world. And it took many years. Like later, I'm very grateful that along the way, I ended up having a fantastic couple of lessons with a guy called Samuel Friesen, who's in Amsterdam. And he let me raid his CD collection of like all this contemporary classical music that he had. And it wasn't until years later where I started kind of like dipping my toe into that and listening to kind of like stuff that I should have been listening to, like your Louis Andriessens and Nankaros and guys like that. That even later on, when I was writing sort of my sort of rock meets classical meets electronic dance music, I would then sort of dip into that world and sort of take a little bit of sounds from that or sounds from jazz. And, you know, I mean, as I mentioned, like, you know, stealing very heavily from colleagues of mine like Galina and Cara. And I mean, everyone in the group wrote. So I had a lot of people to steal from, basically. But yeah.
It's really beautiful. The fact that you call it stealing, but I have the impression that you managed to absorb and to remodel what you absorb in a very unique way, and I really do admire that. I had to reboot earlier, and so I am just afraid that I may be missing questions from the chat, because if one reboots, one deletes the chat. Can you spot anything?
From what I can see, there are no questions here.
Oh, that's great. Then I have it's more time for me. That's great. Electroacoustics. So Bowed Electrons is not exclusively devoted to electroacoustic music. It's a platform that accommodates hopefully many different points of view, musical styles. Are you an analog composer or a hybrid composer, or purely?
It depends on what it's used for. Like I always think of there's a quote, I cannot find where exactly I saw it. I think it was on Instagram or something like that, by Caroline Shaw, who said something along the lines of that how you write is determined by the occasion. And I think that also is like a very sharp thing as well. Like the stuff that we were writing in bars obviously had kind of a feel that, you know, you would expect it in a bar almost, like a rock gig, or the stuff that we knew was going to be in a concert venue. So I mean, like, while it's only been in the last couple of years that I've delved more in kind of like using electronics and stuff like that in my pieces, even like, you know, my slightly more like my analog, for want of a better word, compositions, I will still write in a way that I'm imitating electronics. Like, I mean, the quartet that's being done tonight there's a lot of sort of effects in the quartet, which I'm trying to recreate electric guitar sounds and stuff like that. So it really depends on the piece. I mean, there's one or two tracks that are played in the background of the video where it's, you know, something that I wrote, but very much with the tape. Where it's just like there were certain sounds that I couldn't get with the six of us. So, you know, you just use whatever you have. Right. Yeah, I think it's the same as like with the different stylistic choices. It's just you have this palette. And this is something that I think is very important for, like, you know, the modern composer, but just the ability to sort of just move between these different worlds. Because it's unfortunately there are a very sort of like select few of composers who get to go like, I only compose, this is the only thing that I do.
Yeah.
That one needs to be able to kind of adjust and not evolve, but yeah, depending on the project.
Right. Matthijs, thank you once again. This is a wonderful window on your work. I do look forward very much to this evening's concert, and I do hope that you guys get together again and do stacks of concerts, please.
Thank you. As the video was going, I was getting various messages from Cara discussing things. So the conversations keep going. That's the good news, I suppose. But yes, thank you so much.
Great. Take care. Bye.
Bye.